G'day legends, happy Friday. I hope that you're having a fantastic day and I hope that you're going to have a fantastic weekend. Now my body clock is shattered. I don't know what time of day it is, basically where I am, but we're going to get into an update and we're going to have a look over a few things, but this will be more wordy, more political, more diplomatic things we're going to talk about today rather than looking at footage and geolocations of the front line. So we're going to start with maps and then I think most of the viewers will probably drop off. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at what the People's Deputy of Ukraine has said and what list she has ended up on, a very infamous list. And we need to look at what Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said at the UN. We'll also talk about NATO warning now for a decade of war in Ukraine. So let's have a look at the maps. We'll talk about some movements. We'll talk about some losses and we'll compare both Syriac and Deep State map as we do have updates across all of these. Now, of course, here we have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv, the red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Of course, green areas of which Russia has been and has either been pushed out in offensives or has withdrawn, sometimes a bit of column A and a bit of column B. The red check, of course, is ground Russia has made within then the last 24 hours. Blue, the same, but Ukraine within the past 2 weeks. So let's have a look and see at some bits and pieces that are changing. Now, we're just going to come up into the north here. Now, this is what I basically call the Kizlyvka front, but of course, the main goal for Russia here is the hub here being Kupiansk. Now, what this does show, it's down on the train line right here, that Russia has had an advancement. Now, Syriac doesn't show this today, but yesterday, 24 hours ago, it showed movement in the same area. If I've still got the map, I'll put it up here. So that now is a confirmed movement. Now, we just come south of here a little bit, just to the north of Terny, and we do see that Russia has made then a advancement in between Markivka and Terny. Let's just measure this to get an idea of about 1.9 kilometers, so a mile and a quarter-ish. So there has been some advancement in this direction here, according to this map. Now, we see then Terny here, and this is the first place we're going to talk about in relation to then the Syriac map update. Now, what we're going to have a look at is see where these tree lines are. You get an idea where this tree line is right here, as well as the one running then north-south. Now, this is where Syriac is saying that Russia has had then an advancement, is just in this sector right here where this tree line, and I think there's probably a creek line in here as well, that they've come up into this part here. Of course, this is not shown across other maps, but sometimes Syriac is a few days, few weeks, in the case of Robotny, 3 months in front. So take it on notice at the moment, but of course we'll keep an eye on and see what changes and or what doesn't change as we go then over the maps. Now, before we go too far into the south, I want to come up into the north. Now, on this map, no changes being shown, although other maps are all showing changes. What mostly is showing is that Ukraine is having a successful hook flank maneuver using this reservoir as a natural barrier around clearing the Russians out of Holoboki. Some are saying that Russians are then pushing back on the south in the center of Holoboki as well. Hard to get a grasp, an idea of exactly what is happening, but Ukraine is definitely having an advancement and has had an advancement in here. Then we come on the eastern front here, the Vovchansk then front, and Syriac today is saying that Ukraine has had some success and advancement on this front here as well. So let's then bring this up. So we do know that down in Stalitsia as well, that there was Russia pushing. So just down in here, now this is still shown as grey zone on the deep state, but he's showing it now as blue. Recent video footage shows Ukrainian army controls most of Tataritsia on the Tuva axis, this axis. However, Ukraine advances seems to have taken place between the last days of June and the first weeks of July. So maybe some time ago, but now having an update on the map. Of course, this is always just shown as grey. This is one of the problems I've said with some maps not showing as advancement, is then if you retake that, you can't then show that then advancement. Does that make sense? Anyway, let's continue on down the maps, pushing then down to the south. Now, Seversk front, don't have any updates in here, but some maps are showing that there has been, and saying there has been some levels of breakthrough in this area, putting Seversk at risk. I haven't seen that of anything that I typically go off, but just keep it in the back of your mind. Now, Seversk, this is one of the best defended areas on the entire front, to the point where even Russian commanders have stated before how well the Ukrainian defenses are working in here, and the realistic changes that have occurred in here, with the exception of Rozdalivka in the past couple of weeks, has been very, very strong. Not much has changed. Bilohorivka has been a bit of back and forwards, but over now months. So let's then come down into then the Bakhmut front. Now, no changes shown on this map today. What we did see yesterday was this filling in around Kalinivka. Now, Surak does have then a map update here showing some changes. So let's have a look at Kalinivka and Hirovka. Now, the easiest thing to do here is going to be have a look at where some tree lines are lining up as well. So basically, what Surak is showing here is just a fill-in basically of what then Deep State has been showing. So we see this tree line is this tree line right here, as well as this one heading out then to the north. So basically filling in, showing basically the amount, same, get an idea that that has been confirmed. We know that advancement has then occurred. The biggest difference on this, and you can't see it from this, but is that Surak is showing much more filling around Hirovka here than Surak is showing. Now, what I have said here and other analysts have said very similar, the biggest problem for Russia here is then this the water channel that runs through here. It's going to be very difficult to cross. Is that I think before we see a real push to try and cross this, we're going to see that Russia want to come up and control all this space along then the eastern side of that channel. So filling in this ground here, they get better fire control down onto Chassiv Yar, as well as then limit the amount of control that could actually be flanked back on then a easterly, or then a southeasterly push back on the Russians here. I think that's what they'll want to do before we start seeing a cross in the center here, will be to then secure the flanks and widen this push, because what you would not want to do is end up somewhere like this and have an open threat somewhere like that. Now, that could be incorrect, but if we look at historically how Russia has hit areas like Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Mariupol, these centers, it is an envelopment. And I think we will then potentially see this again. But again, everything is up to change. We will wait and then see. So let's then have a look at the New York, Toretsk front, what is happening down in here. Now, no changes shown on this map, but of course, we know for a couple of weeks, this is where all eyes have been as this has then opened up. Now, as well, the Surak does show similar, but at least in the north here, does show more control, but we're not talking about it today. We're talking about this Zalizne. So this is showing basically the same, I'll call it a finger coming out, this V creating the finger coming out here and this movement into here by the Russians. So again, we can confirm that advancement that was shown maybe at some different times, but again, this is putting then these existing defensive works in here. Of course, this is the 2014 line represented by the purple in then jeopardy. So it will be interesting to see what then occurs over here. And you can see that it may be starting an envelopment if, of course, Chassiv Yar, Konstantinivka, and of course, these are the main areas in the Donbass that Russia would want, is Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, then these areas. So let's just push a little bit further south. Of course, the front that has been shifting the most then basically the entirety of this year, of course, the Avdiivka front. Now we'll refer to it maybe as the Osheretne front. But of course, what the goal is here is to get Pokrovsk, because the roads through Pokrovsk, Minorad, then this pushes a supply route down into Toretsk, New York front, therefore putting more logistical stuff through areas like Konstantinivka and Kramatorsk, and then cutting off at least one of the, there's many supply routes, but one of, well, I shouldn't say many, there's a few, but you cut off one of those, things have to be routed then elsewhere. Now, what we've talked about is trying to get then the intersection up here, but also that Russia will be pushing down these urban centers and then closing up then this open ground. And this is, to my opinion, what I'm seeing is exactly what we've said is what we are then seeing. So let's have a look at this one. This is Novoselivska Persha in here. Now, we have seen Russia push into here and has made ground in here actually fairly quickly over the past, say, week. Just shows a little bit more control out here on then the eastern side. This is difficult to line up because we can't really see where this road bends around, but to my eye, it's showing basically a little bit more, maybe just where my cursor is here, filled in by the Russians, but overall negligible. But there has been some advancement here by Syriac. There's also been advancement just in a slightly different area shown on deep state. So what we can confirm is that the Russians are moving in Novoselivskaya Persha. Now, let's have a look then just to the north of here, this Sokil sort of front, that there has been now a Russian advancement then into the first blocks of Prohez, putting all of Prohez then in grey zone. So let's then have a look at this, and then we can confirm that this has definitely occurred because Syriac, Deep State, both showing that there has been an advancement in here. Of course, this then puts the open ground in here in jeopardy, and this is what we've said. Go down the urban centres here, and then it closes up the open ground due to the difficulty of either holding that or actually just moving through open ground itself. So we get an idea. That's what we like to see, is when multiple things are then lined up and confirmed. Now, what we have seen in here, this is the Wuhledar front. Now, this map shows a lot less than other maps, including other Ukrainian maps. A lot of showing that Russia is almost right up then to this road that runs through here. But what we do know is that the Russian armoured assault, that took place in here. I cannot show you the video, but Telegram, that took heavy losses, brutal footage of that. Basically a thunder run into here. So the geolocation of how far they got, I believe, isn't as far as they got. But again, we don't really know. We don't get everything. Is it going out, coming back, resupply? We know they got hit by mines, by drones, by anti-tank weaponry as well, attached to drones too. So we're not exactly sure where the front line is sitting in here, but from most of the maps, there's definitely been some advancement into here. Again, this supply route through Konstantinivka Mark II through to Wuhledar. I think this front, like we've said for a couple of weeks, is somewhere to watch, seeing where then this may or may not then be moving. Now, we do have a Syriac map update here. Now, let's just zoom in. Again, we can see where this road turns out, so we get an idea of where this is. So here's saying just in where this grey zone where my cursor is filled in by then the Russian forces as well. Just then to the southwest of here, we can see some of these then blocks. So let's have a look. These two square paddocks into the third one. So these are the two into the third one here. That this paddock along then this skinny paddock where my cursor is running, that has been then filled in by the Russians as well. And again, from most of the maps that I've been seeing today, that seems to be where most are saying that is then sitting. So let's come down into Huliapol. Now, I've been in Huliapol myself. I've spoken to members there. There's interviews on my channel, all of this. Now, I question how close this green got, because when I was talking to people in the hospital there, they were saying that from the southern side as well as then the western side, that Russians were basically in Huliapol near the beginning. So I think this south probably is pushed up a little bit. I actually think the exact same with Otakhiv as well. When I was in Otakhiv, of course, this is the train line here, that we got to the train line. We were talking with some of the medical staff who was saying at the time, and this is early 2022, that the Russians were 1 kilometre from the train line, so maybe up in here. Now, I can't confirm or deny this. Maybe it was never held. Maybe that's where they got to. But again, interesting. We'll get an idea maybe later on down the line. But it is saying by Syriac that Russia has made some ground around Marfapil here. Zap front, Russian army restarted advances at Uliapol axis and took control of a series of positions west of Marfapil. So let's just have a look at where then this is sitting. So we see where these buildings are through here. So look, a lot of this is probably shown as grey zone. So I believe it's just then this area where my cursor is in here that is saying where Syriac has then pushed up to. Interestingly, we see where this is right here, that Syriac is not showing then these areas down here in red. Maybe we'll need a full video of just breaking down exactly where maps are or are not sitting according to both of the full maps. We'll try and overlay them if we can. But that will be the end of our mapping then for today. I told you about this decade of war, and I've said multiple times that the goals of which both Russia and Ukraine have, these goals, these lofty goals, especially Ukraine's goals, are years and years and huge losses away. So are Russia's, depending on what Russia's goals are. But what I've said before is I believe, even if the border froze here, that Russia could really sell that as a win. They could sell these other things that are hard to put in numbers of defeating Nazism and this and that. You could sell that as well as this, where if the border got frozen here, Ukraine selling this would almost be impossible the other way. So I think it's in an easier diplomatic situation right now. And like we've said, I've said that the losses in this war, we haven't even seen anywhere near the worst of it yet, depending on where Russia or Ukraine then push, what weapons come into play, what strategy and tactics also then evolve as well, pushing through. Of course, every day that passes, Ukraine and Russia's defensive lines are getting stronger. Therefore, any push through is going to get more costly. But Europe, this is from the BBC, Europe must be prepared for a decade of Ukrainian war. That, speaking to the BBC, Jens Stoltenberg said the paradox of the war in Ukraine is the longer the Western military alliance commits to fighting the war, the faster a resolution can be reached. If NATO allies had to be prepared for conflict in Ukraine going on for more than 10 years, Mr. Stoltenberg said yes. Now, I do question if people have the appetite for war and then the effects of this war for higher fuel and gas and fertilizer prices. I do question if that appetite of war sits there. And I also question if the appetite of a decade of war is in Ukraine as well. You know, like say if you're in Kyiv or Lviv, and it's been a very, very difficult 2.5 years. Your life has been put on hold. Many lives have sadly ended. Many, many millions have then left the country. The longer this goes on and people don't return, the less likely people are going to be to come back as well. I would be very interested to see if elections took place in Ukraine right now of the whole of everyone, and do we continue the war or not? I'd be very interested to see how that would actually come back. Remember, people in the East have a far different experience with the war than, say, if you're in Kyiv or Lviv. And I've spoken about this before. The longer the war goes on, these people that have moved out as refugees into Europe, new jobs, new partners, new lives, basically, how likely are they to move back? If another 10 years, you're talking 12.5 years, that's a lifetime for then a lot of people. And as well, if you're 10 years of war, just the cost of manpower of this industrial, I just don't know if there's appetite for another decade between everyone included. Russia included in this. The main message is that the stronger the support for Ukraine and the longer we're willing to commit, the sooner the war can end. The paradox is that now Putin believes that he can wait us out, so therefore the war continues. With the election coming up in later this year, I do believe that Putin may be able to wait you out, especially now that the war has basically become existential for Russia, that it's now an easier idea to, well, if we stop the war, Russia ends, that's what's being sold. Now that it's existential, as way may people see it, then it may be easier to continue that on longer. When we communicate very clearly that we're here for the long haul, that we have a strong, enduring support for Ukraine, then we have the conditions for a solution where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent state. So it will be very interesting to see the time frame on this war. But I don't think anyone has it in the interest for another 10 years, especially with then elected officials and doubts creeping in, especially with very little ground being made, if then any, with net negatives since 2022. So let's look at this straight off the bat, this Mariana Bezuhla. Now, we have spoken about her before. So firstly, who is she? It was People's Deputy of Ukraine. She's been asked to resign. She's resigned. She's moved. It's hard to get an idea of exactly where she's sitting. But let's Kyiv Independent from July 17th. It's a controversial MP who lambasted military to leave Zelensky's parliamentary group. Now, one thing I will say in my research about her was back before this war, she really spearheaded massive investigations into Ukraine's intelligence service, the SBU. Of course, the SBU rose up out of when the Soviet Union collapsed, you had the KGB, moved into the SBU in Ukraine, and the FSB in Russia. Now, from my experience in Ukraine, people are very, very scared of the SBU and how then they operate, to the point where I know people, Ukrainians, who will not even say the words SBU, and there has been many said that reforms there need to take place before any chances of EU, NATO memberships. Anyway, lawmaker Mariana Bezuhla said on July 17th she had submitted an application to leave President Volodymyr Zelensky's servant of the People's Parliamentary Fraction. Now, I believe this was a submitted application to leave, but I think it was fairly heavily pushed on that you're going to be sacked then if you don't. Has made an announcement shortly after she was dismissed as the head of subcommittee on civilian oversight of the military. She presented her dismissals as a reaction to speaking the truth about the problems in the armed forces. She's very highly critical and points out then what she sees as a lot of issues in the military, especially on then Facebook. And this is then her Facebook page, and I've been sent this about 1 million times from people as well. Now, you can look into her history. It's very interesting about where she's come from, what she's done. We will talk about it. You can go and look that up. It's very easy to find. The boundary of the red line, I won't keep my mouth shut. Why now? So on every day, Syrskyi, so Commander-in-Chief, a stay in office reduces our cowardice and kills people. Why is he such a criminal as Sodol? How the logic of journalism care to protect oneself works on the example breakthrough defense of their bridges in Donetsk in New York. These events and the erasure of evidence are repeated over and over again, and no one is punished. Why, without the inevitable intervention of the president, as soon as possible, our army will be wiped out and turned into uneducated, solid infantry? A limited fit in zombie brigade. So you can see very heavily worded, highly critical of what is happening. Now, this isn't the full thing, but presenting just bits that I've found interesting, and then we'll see what has then come of this. Mass murder, a loss of territory is the boundary. A lot of sources confirmed to me two extremely important points regarding the position of Syrskyi and its surroundings. He agreed to sign a ceasefire regime and any variations in the subject of surrender and forcing peace. He does not believe in victory and sincerely believes that we're incapable of gaining advantage over the Russians on our own soil. He thinks symmetrically and makes the only logical conclusion for himself. Remember, after Zelensky's article in The Economist and Deaf Corner, I wrote about the head who does not believe in victory must go. So this is what we have spoken about before with Zelensky, that did Zelensky really believe in that victory? We had seen a pullback, and also talking about maybe not pushing forward in some areas as well. And then we've, of course, seen Zelensky sacked from his position and then moved to the UK. I'm now more sure the current situation of Alexander Stanislavovich and Valery Fedorovich do not want the unexpected success of the ZSUs, the armed forces of Ukraine. It's completely different, distant thinking between us and you. Let me explain. The profitable of the Zelensky and Syrskyi remains in office because nothing has changed for him, and he can manipulate further about himself as the one and only developing political gains. His personal vision could go down in history and save the entire layer of the general mafia, which is now closer to being demolished than ever. Not believing in victory, you'll be kidnapping people through the TCC and SP, so off the street, we've seen through territorial police and recruiting. Watching new technologies being attempted as witty experiments, sending people in inertia tasks of holding and landing for reporting. Your inability of factual lack of places change in the world will be masked by experience and knowledge of the past. And to defend yourself at any cost, for example, lying to the president that you'll make a counterattack. Or covering their mistakes by removing commanders who know what's really going on. Or more, sending their units on suicide missions so that there are fewer witnesses and people intimidated. So this has been picked up by a lot of media and spoken about. Is there a belief in that Ukraine can win in the upper echelon of command? Now, of course, these aren't quotes from the commanders themselves. It's from her apparent sources within that too. So it will be very interesting, but is highly critical. Now, this has landed her on the Miro Trevets, then infamous list as well, colloquially known as then the kill list. Other people like Tucker Carlson are on this as well. Deliberate public actions discrediting the bodies of state power of management of Ukraine, discrediting, demoralizing armed forces, lawful activity of armed forces, obstructing that, conscious action splitting civil society, dissemination and information containing state secrets via Russia to achieve strategic goals. She's the deputy member, VAU Committee, National Security, Defence, Intelligence, servant of the People's Party. So this is very interesting that she's now wound up on this as well as an official in the system. Now, what actually is this? It's very hard to know. What it's marketed as is like a NGO of Ukraine calling out then enemies of the people. Although some will say it's a Ukrainian intelligence op, others will actually say it's a reverse psychology Russian FSB op to discredit Ukraine as well. So it's very interesting, but I'm more leaning towards the former on this, but it's interesting to see that she herself ended up on this as a long-time politician as well. So let me know what you think of what she's saying. It may be a bit conspiratorial, but of course she has a lot more information than we do. Is there a belief that Ukraine can win in the upper echelon, or how do you see that? Now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, of course, Russia is head of the Security Council in the UN at the moment, and I'm pretty sure that's correct. And Lavrov has now spoken and had a Q&A. We're going to link this to who Trump has elected as his vice president should he get into power. So I'm just going to go over, you can look at this full thing on the UN website. I'm just going to go over bits that I've read through this. I'm just going to go through bits that I've highlighted. So the question was, Zelensky said on Monday, Russia should be represented at the second peace summit on Ukraine in November. So we reported on this, that interestingly, Zelensky said himself, the next one, Russia should be present. We've also said if it's coming to the table with the plan currently at the moment that does not fit the situation on the ground, Russia may not attend, China may not attend, but we will see. The second summit is a natural follow-up to the process that began almost a year ago. He talks about the different conferences that have happened here, as well as the most recent one in Switzerland. The second conference, mentioning not just Switzerland, but other countries, could become a platform for a second round as well. However, when discussing the agenda, they have, in one way or another, formulated an absolute one-sided approach that we and many other parties that sincerely interested in peace found unacceptable. So, of course, countries like, say, China didn't then attend because they knew it wasn't going to come to peace at that. It was one-sided. It was presenting then the Ukrainian 10-point peace plan, and Russia was not invited, and they found that unacceptable. China was very vocal about this. The only thing that's clear that Zelensky's formula, which has been on the table for a long time now, is still at the heart of the efforts. And this is what we have said. With that peace plan being at the heart of the effort, if to seek the guns falling silent at the end doesn't take into the situation on the ground at the moment, for that 10-point peace plan to get up and be what ends the war, Ukraine need a military victory in the war, which, of course, many question. Now, speaking further on this, that China, Brazil, and many other countries have joined to advocate convening a conference on the basis of principles that will be accepted by all parties. We have heard rumours that China may have their own peace conference as well, unite the global south, invite other nations to come, including, of course, then Russia. Look at the evolution of the entire process. We're being told that Russia must fall back to 1991 borders. The problem is that we've been lied at all times. We had an agreement reached between Russia and the Ukrainian delegations in Istanbul. The Istanbul Agreement in April 22 had been signed. Ukraine would have remained within 1991 borders, minus Crimea and the territory controlled by Russian troops at that time. So this is something interesting here, because we actually had a look over that. Of course, that settlement, Istanbul Agreement, that got leaked maybe a month ago, and we reported on that as soon as it came out. But we weren't actually sure because it never showed the maps. So it sounded like at the time that all Russia would then take is Crimea and the DPR, LPR regions as they see. But he is saying that territories controlled by Russian troops at that time, so the amount of ground in April was significantly more. Of course, it called for neutral status of Ukraine, not NATO, but that they could join the EU, and limits on weapon systems as well. Of course, that was then very quickly then turned away. It depends who you ask of what exactly happened and why that was then thrown out. Do you foresee Russia-US relations if former President Trump is elected, particularly with his vice president pick, J.D. Vance? And we'll have a look at what he has said. So J.D. Vance, now these people are saying that this is like a new thing he said. It's not. Trump said that he was going to be his VP within the last couple of days, and you'll see that this is from May and this is from 22, so it's a long time ago. But I don't think America's interest to continue to fund an effective, never-ending war in Ukraine. Of course, we have that linked with Jens Stoltenberg saying about a decade of war. We also have other American officials saying we don't want another Afghanistan, pointing to the 20-year then war. I've got to be honest with you, I don't really care what happens to Ukraine one way or another. Of course, Feb 22, right when, of course, the war kicked off. Back to Lavrov. Some things have changed, but on our position. You know that we do not interfere in the internal affairs of other states, including the US. Of course, people will push back vehemently on that with elections and pushes around. And I will say, every major power in some way or another has some interference and some where they would prefer things to go. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't have foreign intelligence agencies then doing operations around the world either. The one who probably does it the most in the world is the CIA. I'm not saying that then Russia's the only one doing it. No, but I'm saying everyone does it to a degree. Look at all the bloggers, the media, whatever, having this hate campaign, this campaign against Trump. I'm not sure that every single one of them isn't part, at least some of them aren't part of some push to elect someone else as well. Now, again, Putin has mentioned this repeatedly. We will be ready to work with the US leader that the American people elect, who is willing to engage in equitable and mutually respectful dialogue. As a reminder, during the Trump administration, despite various sanctions, dialogue was still underway. We know Putin and Trump did have definite dialogue there too, although there was sanctions. Then we've seen, of course, what has occurred now. Now, question is somewhat a follow-up question of Eddie Vance's recent comments. It's not about him criticising aid to Ukraine. He also called for a negotiated peace in Ukraine. So the ones I showed, they were just the ones most media titles are going. Of course, there are other comments too. I'd like to get your views and comments about aid to Ukraine and what would final borders look like if a negotiated settlement agreed by Moscow. I've heard the same as you. He advocates peace and ending the aid. It's something we can welcome. Indeed, having the influx of weapons to Ukraine lead to an end to the war. And we pursue solutions that consider not only the realities on the ground, but also public life. So realities on the ground, where the border is sitting, how difficult it may be to push that around, and the bargaining chip Russia does have because they occupy a lot of land. If you hadn't done this, a significant portion of territories that have held referendums and subsequently become part of Russia would have remained in Ukraine. So if they had then had the peace agreement in 22, he's saying that you would have actually held more areas. Of course, not all these areas of which Russia has annexed are actually completely occupied by Russia either. Of course, what was put forward by Putin just before the Swiss Peace Conference was to take those remaining bits of ground for then peace. Of course, that fell over as soon as it came out. Back to Birkenstock. Zelensky formula is a 10-point plan. It's a 10-point plan from the very outset. One of those points, Russia must revert to 1991 borders. A tribunal needs to be established to bring trial to Russian leadership, as well as reparations, restrictions, and weapons Russia may have near the Ukrainian territory. So like I've said, this needs to be done militarily. Russia is not going to agree with this, with the reality we're seeing on the ground currently. But it also included food, power, nuclear safety, humanitarian issues, exchange of prisoners of war, and so on. These plans, he says, are extremely arrogant and a dead end. They were trying to invite as many people as possible to these events, especially Birkenstock as a matter of priority. They were trying to coax the participants to focus on parts of the plan which there can be no doubt, such as food supplies, power, and so on. So this is actually an interesting point he makes here, that leaning on and saying, yeah, we want the first. I've always asked, why is the sovereignty and territorial integrity number 5 and 6 in the 10-point peace plan when this seems to be the primary concern? Why is it not 1 and 2? What he's saying here is that if you make things like nuclear safety, food supplies as number 1, 2, and 3, then participants, of course, no one has any doubts about this and more likely, as he puts it, are coaxed into this. I hadn't really thought then about that. So that is interesting. This is why we need to read through things like this. Even if you hate him, whatever, it's interesting to see what people actually say in long form. And the thing is, with all of this, it's either available on a president of Ukraine's website. Zelensky's website has all of his speeches, transcripts, everything. All of Putin's are on the Kremlin website, and the UN has things like this as well. You can actually look through it. Anyone can just go and have a look through it and see what was actually said outside of the typical media. I think this is where media is going to go, is people going to do their own thing. Next point is nuclear security. Initially, it included the security of energy supplies. I wondered why they left nuclear security there and why they took out energy security. This is an interesting point. I'm not saying he's right on this, but it's an interesting point. Had they kept energy security there, we would have had to discuss who had blown up the Nord Stream. So if you just had energy, well, it would go, well, okay, a big problem for the energy security was Nord Stream into Europe. what then occurred there? And as he actually correctly points out, Sweden's investigation after 18 months didn't find anything. We know Germany was not happy about this, and they've been very silent on the issue of what has happened here. Now, I don't think we've seen the end of Nord Stream. I think once the guns fall silent, and once it's not such a touchy subject to criticize anything on Ukraine, I think more will come out about this. One, it was like the biggest environmental disaster like ever. No one points at that. I drink out of a paper straw. I don't know if I'm doing it, but I drink out of a paper straw. This was done and everyone's silent on it. And of course, it's jeopardized a hell of a lot and put a lot of costs way up. So maybe that's why it's just nuclear security. It's an interesting point. Yeah, this is why I read through things like this. Even if I disagree with a lot of it, it's interesting. Regarding energy, the Nord Stream pipelines, pipeline gas, liquefied natural gas, all of that is directly linked to the food crisis. In the EU, production of fertiliser has fallen sharply as a result of very high gas prices. Watch Clarkson's farm. You can see how much more expensive fertiliser is. Of course, leading down the line at how expensive then food is, then at the other end. Sorry, tongue-tied. This is all inextricably linked. So that is very interesting. It's interesting what he says. It's interesting to look at the 10-point peace plan. But what I've said is currently what is being put forward by Russia and Ukraine, it's too far apart to have any form of like settlement there. That Russia want to annex the complete Luhansk, Donetsk, Kharkiv, Kherson regions at maybe a minimum. That's what they put forward. Ukraine wants a return of all 1991 borders, including Crimea. We're this at the moment. Now, it's probably going to end up here somewhere by the end of the war. Potentially, it will go one way completely. We'll see a complete collapse and everything will be risked and lost. But I'm not really sure. Anyway, legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. This wasn't meant to be so long, but look after yourselves and I will speak to you tomorrow. Have a great weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.